Welcome to Who Killed Haing Ngor's bonus episode for Season 3. If you've come along with me this far, you know that this season examines the seeds of organized crime in 1990s Cambodia, the hints of how it would evolve into the mafia state that it is today. I also can't help thinking about all of Cambodia's turning points. UNTAC, the UN peacekeeping mission when I showed up, that was obviously a huge one. But that was just one turning point for Ngor and millions of Cambodians who had lived through independence, the monarchy, the Khmer Rouge, a couple of coups d'etat, and more. The UN phase is when Ngor essentially went home to help rebuild his country. In this episode, I'm picking up material from the cutting room floor to take a closer look at that turning point and challenge some of the narratives around it. I'm going to let that material do most of the talking. Let me be the first to admit, it's pretty easy to throw stones at the 1990s good intentions from up here in 2026. I'm indulging in hindsight. But that does nothing to alter the fact that very smart and very dedicated people, both Cambodian and international, put their lives on the line to help Cambodia and other troubled nations. My name is Patricia Noonan, and this is Who Killed Haing Ngor. When I speak to Cambodian leaders active in the UNTAC period, they pretty much all agree. The peacekeeping mission was entirely necessary, and it was incredibly welcome. But it didn't do everything. If you were a professor, what grade would you give to UNTAC?
I think it's a very helpful to have UNTAC to help implement the peace agreement.
I'm talking with Haing Ngor, formerly with the Buddhist Liberal Democratic Party. During the Civil War, he was the Secretary General of the BLDP's military arm, the Khmer People's National Liberation Front. That makes him one of the people to actually sign the Paris Peace Accords.
The people of Cambodia was hoping that once we sign the agreement, peace would come and we will enjoy our life. So this is a big moment for Cambodia.
UNTAC is the acronym for the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia. At its peak, it brought more than 21,000 military and civilian personnel to the country from more than 100 countries. UNTAC divided Cambodia into sectors where Blue Beret soldiers and military observers helped to keep the peace. It was a surreal little meta version of the globe. Uruguayans running this province, Bangladeshis over here, Bulgarians over there, Australians, Indonesians, Brits, Pakistanis, Russians, Chinese, Americans. It seemed like everyone was there. Every different country's military all wore slightly different camouflage fatigues. When I first got there, I found that super confusing. Later on, I had them all memorized. And so that was just one small way in which my mind was blown, and I was hardly alone.
For the average Cambodian, it was a miracle. They could not believe it. They could not believe there is 20,000 blue helmets in the country to protect and to monitor a ceasefire among the Cambodian party.
Roland Ang is a former ambassador at large for the royal government of Cambodia.
When you have something like 400,000 people from the refugee camps moving back to Cambodia, it was incredible. The people can choose where they're going back to their hometown. They will have a piece of land. Some people will have a cow, some basic utensil to start living again. It's amazing. Just amazing.
Saying the United Nations is like saying the government. It's one body in a sense, but it's actually made up of dozens of smaller agencies. Some were brilliant, like the UN High Commissioner for Refugees that Ang just mentioned, and the UN civic education teams and UN volunteers who went into the villages to teach people who'd never voted before about democracy and elections, They were fantastic. There are too many smaller agencies to name. But it's at the more senior levels where things get more complicated.
What is missing in the peace agreement is that when one party don't respect the provision of the agreement, there are no compliant provision in the peace agreement that oblige them to continue to implement the agreement.
He's talking about when the Khmer Rouge dropped out of the peace plan in early 1993. A staggering decision considering that they were allowed to participate in the first place. But the Khmer Rouge suddenly said they wouldn't take part in the May 1993 National Assembly elections, and those were the point of the entire UN mission. Suddenly people were asking, could peace be achieved without the Khmer Rouge? Would they attack polling stations, ruining the ballot itself? In the end, the Khmer Rouge did not attack. The UN couldn't make them stay, as Haing Ngor pointed out, but dropping out of the peace plan was the worst strategic move they ever made. The Khmer Rouge had sidelined themselves. In many ways, the UN elections were a marvelous success. People lined up for hours ahead of the polls opening. Many were wearing their best clothing. I was there. It was incredible to witness, and Cambodia was on a high. And then they counted the votes. Here's Roland Eng.
United Nations did so well in explaining what democracy means. That you can elect your representative without fair. However, the result was very disappointing for everyone.
Funcinpec won the election. Their candidate was Prince Norodom Ranariddh, the son of then Prince Sihanouk. But the incumbent Prime Minister Hun Sen refused to give up power. And whenever push came to shove, the UN proved themselves largely ineffective. They couldn't make the Khmer Rouge stay in the peace deal, and after the election, they couldn't make Hun Sen step down. Couldn't you say that Prime Minister Hun Sen also, he was not compliant? Funcinpec won the elections and the Prime Minister declined to give up power entirely.
I think Prime Minister Hun Sen rightly said that if the Khmer cannot agree with each other, no one can help. So UNTAC cannot do everything, cannot implement everything.
I really appreciate Haing Ngor and Roland Eng, each for making time to speak with me, and I take each gentleman at his word with everything he says. But I want to reiterate, Cambodia is a dictatorship. Hun Sen actually handed the premiership down to his son, Hun Manet, in 2023, but he's still powerful, he's still active behind the scenes. So no Cambodian with links inside the country is likely to feel entirely free to speak his or her mind on politics. If there's one theme that runs through my interviews about Cambodia and transnational crime, it's this: just how badly the world underestimated Prime Minister Hun Sen and the Cambodian People's Party, the CPP. Brad Adams is a veteran in the human rights field. In Cambodia, he was an advisor to the National Assembly Commission on Human Rights. Later, he was with the UN Center for Human Rights.
What wasn't appreciated at the time of the UNTAC mission and the 93 elections, and even through the next few years, was that Cambodia, the CPP was the progeny of the Vietnamese Communist Party. And so people thought it was an actual communist party. It had the structure of it and the discipline of it, but it had become a deeply capitalist party even before that election. And really the way that worked was that they privatized every state asset they could, whether it was banks, whether it was hotels, land, forests, Later on, they got into the drug business, casinos, and their version of capitalism is essentially mafia capitalism, mafia crony capitalism, with Hun Sen at the top of he's basically the mafia kingpin. They run protection rackets. You need to get permission for any major contract. You need to give a piece of it upwards through the chain, ultimately to Hun Sen and his people. Hun Sen's a billionaire for a reason.
Adams was in my Strange Bedfellows episode earlier this season. He pointed out then that the 1993 elections are remembered as that global success story. They were actually incredibly violent behind the scenes, and the CPP was responsible for most of it.
They were trying to keep records on every single person living in the country and their political affiliation. And they used these teams to kill people, to threaten people, to intimidate people. They had ceremonies in villages where people swore oaths to vote for the CPP. They used them to give away goodies, to bribe people for their loyalty. It was a very, very extensive and sophisticated, I wouldn't say sophisticated, very, very extensive operation that marshaled all the assets of the state: military, police, civil service, governor's offices, mayor's offices, all the way down to the village level. And so like Cambodians would always say, there's spies in our villages. And a lot of Westerns would always laugh at that because we just kind of couldn't understand like how pervasive that was, and also like how second nature that was. CPP were the children of the Vietnamese. Vietnamese were children of the Soviet Union and the Chinese. All these communist parties operated this way.
Despite the massive campaign of intimidation, Fun Sen Pech still won.
What happened was that the UN and others breathed a sigh of relief because, as you said, election day went off largely peacefully. And because the opposition got more votes and more seats than the CPP, they said, well, ipso facto, it's a free and fair election. But that is not how you actually decide what a free and fair election is. Just because the opposition wins doesn't make it free and fair. It was not free and it wasn't fair. It's just that popular sentiment overcame all the obstacles. But I think, as I always said to people, would you have accepted that election in your own country if it was the United States or France or Australia? And the answer was, of course not. Never.
When we're talking about Hun Sen's refusal to give up power, we're talking about UNTAC at its most senior levels, the levels of diplomatic statecraft. There, we're talking about Mission Chief Yasushi Akashi from Japan, and to a lesser extent, the military chief, General John Sanderson from Australia. They totally caved.
They went into Cambodia to get out of Cambodia for geopolitical reasons. They needed to have this election, this peacekeeping effort, to untangle relationships between the U.S., China, Russia, previously the Soviet Union, and Vietnam in particular, and the rest of ASEAN. I did a lot of interviews later with the principals in this, and basically this was what the international community wanted, because they thought that if the opposition took power, the CPP wouldn't accept it, and the CPP had all the guns. And I spoke to General Sanderson, who was the Australian leader of the military for UNTAC, and he said, look, it was really clear, at least from my government, and my position was that we were not going to have a single UNTAC soldier killed to defend an election result that would have required us to say that the opposition won and we were going to disarm the CPP.
It's deeply cynical.
It's entirely cynical. And Hun Sen learned that he could challenge the rest of the world and win, which I think explains his behavior the last 30 years.
Real peace didn't come to Cambodia until late 1998, 5 years after the UN left. Thanks to UNTAC, the civil war was vastly diminished, and Cambodia was once again integrated into the international community. But the Khmer Rouge were still out there, and the conflict simmered in certain spots. Pai Lin, An Long Veng, and Camp Hot, to name a few. It wasn't until Christmas Day 1998 when the last surviving Khmer Rouge leaders finally surrendered to the government. That was another turning point. The UN had a pretty straightforward blueprint for peace in the 1990s, whether it was Cambodia, East Timor, Haiti, Guatemala, or later Afghanistan. Throw a democratic election, launch an open market economy, and peace and prosperity would follow. But that blueprint assumed that strongmen and warlords would magically transform into founding fathers. It overlooked corruption, and it overlooked organized crime.
Could it have become something better? Probably. Could it have become something worse? Certainly. I don't know that it was ever going to become what UNTAC hoped it to be.
Jacob Sims is an expert in the intersection of transnational crime and human rights. He's a visiting fellow at Harvard's Asia Center.
UNTAC's goal wasn't combat organized crime. It was create a fledgling democracy. And yeah, I do think actually like the criminalized autocracy as a state model is probably one of the biggest foils to this idea that democracy is like a powerful world-changing force, because like that's the thing that will eat a democracy, and it's also the thing that will prevent a democracy from forming, even if you inject billions of dollars of cash and goodwill into it at its earliest stages.
The UN arrived in Cambodia in 1992, just a year after the Soviet Union collapsed. The term mafia state and concerns about them did not really gain prominence for another decade.
Yeah, frankly, like I don't think anybody in the world could have made that argument back in the 90s. So I don't know that necessarily is the fault of UNTAC or anything. And no, I'm not actually certain that there was a possible success story out of that, within the lens of like a liberal democratic dreamscape that UNTAC was trying to create. I don't know that Cambodia was ever going to become that.
Now, UNTAC was not entirely ignorant about illicit networks. There were constant efforts to stop illegal logging and the illegal gem trade through Khmer Rouge territory and into Thailand. But Cambodia's criminal financing goes much deeper than that. My goal with this podcast has been to investigate the murder of Haing Ngor, so we haven't gotten into this in depth, and I don't think the individual I'm about to mention is linked to Ngor's death in any way. But a very powerful figure in 1990s Cambodia was a Thai-Chinese organized crime boss named Teng Boon Ma. He was investigated in depth by journalist Nate Thayer for the Far Eastern Economic Review. That started with a November 1995 article, Medellin on the Mekong. And Teng Boon Ma, for the record, died in 2016. Cambodia used to be so poor, and Teng Boon Ma was so rich, that he used to help the army meet payroll. He helped finance the military's 1994 dry season offensive against the Khmer Rouge, who had dropped out of the UN peace plan and were back in the jungle. Teng Boon Ma also financed Hun Sen's 1997 coup that overthrew Prince Ranariddh. Where did Teng Boon Ma get his money? Heroin. He was a narco-trafficker, according to the U.S. State Department. He used Cambodia as a transit point to ship heroin around the world. That's how deeply entrenched organized crime goes and how enmeshed it is with the CPP. It was just months after the turning point of UNTAC's departure. Teng Boon Ma's piece of the heroin trade helped Prime Minister Hun Sen keep the Khmer Rouge at bay. On top of that, after the international community spent $2 billion on a UN peacekeeping mission, heroin helped overturn Cambodia's first ever democratic election. Like I said at the beginning, I've been thinking a lot about turning points. Was it inevitable that Cambodia would become the safe haven for transnational organized crime that it is now? Was it the coup? Was it something else? I put that question to Jacob Sims.
Like, I think if you were going to say, like, what was the real beginnings of the transnational crime we see today, it was either whenever the CPP first started trying to figure out a way to make money with very limited economic opportunities back in the late 80s, early 90s, or it was when the first casino arrived and the sort of, you could say, like, corrupt Cambodian ruling elite culture merged with a mechanism for them to expand their wealth and grip on power.
The first casino was Naga World. That was the major turning point. Soon Cambodia would host scores of casinos, making it a money laundering base for criminal networks.
When Naga World was created, I think the CPP was still sort of testing out, like, how firm of an iron death grip do we have on this country, and, like, let's go into the gambling space slowly and not in the most, potentially explosive way with a Malaysian Chinese ethnic person. And then a Chinese one opens up in Poi Pet, and yeah, so you could see like them sort of slow rolling the admission of these, the gambling tycoons.
Naga World, also known as the Floating Casino, opened in 1995. It's run by the Singaporean criminal syndicate, the Ah Kong. To me, Naga World is where Haing Ngor most likely borrowed money. And I think it's highly plausible that it was the Ah Kong who wanted him dead. You can hear the details of my reporting in the Naga World episode. So let's just take a minute to circle back to Ngor and all the turning points he went through. Born in 1940, he was 13 years old when Cambodia won its independence from France, ending 90 years of colonial rule. He lived through Prince Sihanouk's monarchy and the 1970 coup d'etat that overthrew it. He lived through the utterly corrupt Lon Nol regime that followed. He survived the Khmer Rouge period. And during the Civil War, he was a refugee, starred in a movie, and became an activist. Finally, during UNTAC, he went home again. Cambodia was where he wanted to be. Then Cambodia opened its first casino since the 1960s. It was the one turning point in Cambodia's history that Ngor did not survive. Since Ngor's day, the situation has only gotten worse. Cambodia is now home to tens of thousands of trafficked human beings locked up in cyber scam compounds as modern-day slaves. I went into that phenomenon in my Taiwan series. Southeast Asia's criminal economy has gotten so bad and so well integrated that it's threatening the stability of the region itself. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime just issued a new report on that in July 2026, if you're curious about that. Sometimes I wonder what it is about Cambodia, how one little country can be the center of these repeated permutations of human suffering. Sometimes I wonder what Haing Ngor would think about all this. What's become of his country since he's been gone? I can't imagine he'd be pleased. I haven't got anything profound to offer. I'm also at a bit of a loss. Except someday I hope that Cambodia finds itself once again in another, more hopeful turning point. My name is Patricia Noonan, and this is Who Killed Haing Ngor? That's the end of Season 3. I will be taking a break from the podcast, but it's not the end of the investigation. Hopefully, Frank and I will be able to gather some more material to advance the story further. If so, I'll come back with a Season 4. If you knew Haing Ngor personally and would like to contribute to the investigation, please get in touch at whokilledhaingnor@gmail.com. I'm happy to keep conversations off the record. I'm on both Telegram and Substack as MP Noonan. If you want to support the investigation, there's a donation button on the webpage, whokilledhaingnor.com. My thanks to everyone I've interviewed and everyone who's helped me out behind the scenes. And thank you for listening.